at the University of São Paulo under Thiago Quintal's supervision. And I'm here to talk a little bit about the results we've got so far from my project under the title Omnivory as a macroevolutionary seed, lower diversification and higher transition rates into omnivorous birds. So a little motivation. Ever since Darwin, it is thought of that Darwin already thought of biological interactions as motors of diversification, right? So, and one of the most a very straightforward way of thinking about biological interactions is thinking about diet. So the classic example of Darwin's finches. In the last few years, there have been a lot of studies being published dealing with the influence of traits in the diversification of different groups, and especially diet in this case, and mostly due to the emergence of several packages and methods as an example for diversity models that have been developed in the past few years that allowed us to directly infer the influence of traits on the diversification of organisms. To have some quality results about this influence, a group should have a very good diversity both in the number of species and in ecologies or morphologies or whatever type of trait we are dealing with. And that's the case of birds. So Jets and collaborators published this comprehensive phylogeny a couple of years ago. It had showed that birds have around 10,000 species with a lot of different morphologies, especially for the beak in this case, but a lot of different ways of dealing with its food. What led us to ask if is there any relationship between diet and diversification for this group. So in our analysis, as I said, we used the Jets phylogeny that was published in 2012. We actually dealt with 200 trees from the posterior distribution in order to account for phylogenetic uncertainty. And we used the trait-dependent diversification model that, although we know that it has its limitations, it still can provide us with some very nice clues about the effect of traits. We used a Bayesian implementation of this model to incorporate not only uncertainties coming from the parameter estimates, but also from phylogenetic uncertainty, as I said. And the script we used is available on the Daniele Silvestro's GitHub. To use as a trait, we used a comprehensive dietary database published in 2013. And with this database, we could classify all 10,000 species into 9 different dietary guilds, including carnivores, frugivores, granivores, herbivores, insectivores, nectarivores, omnivores, piscivores, and scavengers based on the preferred food item consumed for each species. And just a side note, although we used scavengers in our analysis, I'm not going to present you the results because of the small sample size, only 33 species. So the posterior distributions were kind of crazy, so I'm just showing you the results for the first 8 guilds. As I said, we used 200 trees of the posterior distribution in order to account for the uncertainty on the topologies and branch lengths of the trees. 100 trees from each backbone the Jets used. And our model had a total of 93 parameters, which means that we had to wait a very big time in order for the chains to converge. But in the end, as a result, here I'm showing the posterior distributions of net diversification rates obtained for our analysis. So one thing that we can see at first is that omnivores show lower net diversification rates when compared to all other guilds. And also it's important to notice that it's the only guild that show negative posterior distribution values, including the median and the mean. And these results, when analyzing all the speciation and extinction rates in separate, for omnivores, we can see that it's the only guild where the median posterior distribution, extinction values are higher than the speciation values. All other guilds have speciation values higher than extinction values, and it's the only guild also that has that the posterior distribution of extinction rates have values greater than the values for the posterior distribution of speciation rates. We tested for the differences to check if those differences are significant under our Bayesian framework. And what we saw is that indeed the net diversification rates and the species, these are the posterior distributions of differences between each of the rates in comparison to omnivores. So this is like carnivores minus omnivores, frugivores minus omnivores, and so on. And we noticed that indeed the net diversification rates and speciation rates of all other guilds are greater than of omnivores to different degrees of significance. And also that the extinction rates are also slightly higher in omnivores than in other guilds. Lastly, we've got some results about the transition rates, and what we can see, we allowed all transition rates to be freely estimated, and what we can see here is that basically all significant transition rates are towards Omnivory, with a few minor exceptions towards Insectivory, but basically all transitions goes towards Omnivory. With all those results, we could propose an ecological scenario to try to explain or to contextualize these macroevolutionary patterns. So one can represent the omnivore niche in a two-dimensional way like this, and we can do it also with the non-omnivore niches, like more specialized guilds. And it's not hard to think that most of the times there will be inter-guild competition at any place, not necessarily with all guilds competing at the same time, but with different combinations of those. So in times of stable and or predictable resources, what we think is that the more specialized guilds would outcompete the omnivore species in a certain place, which will lead them to vanish. And this is basically represented with the higher extinction rates observed for omnivores. And what we think is that these higher extinction rates for omnivores can also prevent the speciation processes, since small satellite populations are subjected to these high extinction rates too, and they don't have time enough to fully speciate in a scenario of ephemeral speciation. In contrast, in times of unstable or unpredictable resources, omnivores might have some sort of advantage when compared to other specialized guilds for not relying on only one specific food type. And in this case, what we guess is that some individuals from species coming from more specialized guilds that can add one or more food items in order to try to not depend on or rely only in the preferred food item would in fact be favorably selected and be turning into an omnivore species. And this is reflected on these high transition rates towards omnivory that we observed in our models, in our results. Just to have a big picture of how those diets are distributed along the phylogeny, we can see that the more specialized guilds are somehow clustered, so groups of sister species that belongs to the same guild, which might reflect speciation processes. Whereas when we take a look at the omnivore species distribution, we can see it's much more scattered and spread throughout the tree, also reflecting this transition origin. But as we can see, omnivores are the second biggest guild. So how a guild that is subjected to higher extinction rates can still prevail and be present in such a high richness? So the take-home messages are that omnivores have lower diversification rate, net diversification rate, that either comes from higher extinction rates or lower speciation rates when compared to other guilds. And this in combination with the higher transition rates into omnivores we proposed, so the title of the talk, where omnivores act as a macroevolutionary sink, where all the speciation processes are basically happen on the more specialized guilds, and then eventually they will turn into omnivores where they readily speciate and often goes extinct. So I would like to thank CAPES for the funding, the Department of Ecology at the University of São Paulo for all the logistics, Dr. Daniela Silvestre for providing me with and helping me with the base implementation, Dr. Sterling Grant and Fernando Marcos for letting me use their servers for quite a long time, and also the crowd of LabMM that might not be the most serious looking lab in the world, but it's one of the most brilliant ones. And that's it. Thank you very much.
We have quite a lot of time for questions. Anyone?
Yes. Hi, really great talk. Do you think it might be easier for some specialized food like diets to move into omnivory than others? Like, do you think there's any morphological constraints on diet types?
After having the results, we started taking a look more closely onto the Omnivore guild, and some modularity measures we took regarding diet similarity. We actually saw that are basically 3 types of omnivores that are more related to different combinations of more diets. So one is more like towards carnivores eating other animals, and 2 herbivore guilds, sub-guilds, let's so say. One antagonistic and one mutualistic, so quite nice results. We are still investigating those. But yes, I truly believe that it's much easier to see. I guess we can see species that are more closely related to a frugivore species because its ancestors used to be frugivores and then just add the insects, for example, and just turn it into omnivores according to our classification.
Someone else?
Yeah. Great job.
Thank you.
Did you get to look at whether there are particular environments in which these transitions appear to happen more often?
Yeah, no, this is one of the next steps of our project. So to take a look at some of macroecological predictions we have from these results. So we think that some patterns of species distribution might emerge from this, and we will take a look in the next steps. Yes, Mike?
Gustavo, do you want to try to reconcile the talk from this morning that suggested that omnivores had lower rates of extinction, right?
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out how that makes sense with what you're finding for these, because the extinction rates are lower. It looks to me like the transitions, the origination should be higher from your. I don't know. Can you?
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
I thought about also Samantha's Price paper from 2012, where she found out basically the same result as I did, as with omnivores showing a smaller net diversification for extant species. So I don't know, something might have changed during this time that today we are not. And there also, it might come from some limitations of the models. For example, these constant rate models they do not perfectly fit what went on. So this is something.
Can I just add a comment to that? Well, one potential difference is that this bird in the morning was mammal. That's a boring difference. But another potential, perhaps interesting difference is that the previous talk we had in the morning, the fossil record as a whole might suffer a lot from anagenic speciation. And then there's a possibility that the unspecialized species are morphologically boring from the fossil record perspective, that we just don't break them as much as a specialized species would have a lot of knobs and bobs for us to actually call it a different species, and therefore reduce the longevity of the species. So it might be the case that the fact that omnivores have a lower extinction rate in the fossil record might be just because we're not being able to pick up all the species in the fossil record. That's the action here. So that's another possibility in the sense that not always the fossil record is necessarily the answer. Although I like to read it.
Well, Burin.
Thank you very much.